Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be tackling a topic that I think is so incredibly fundamental to, well, really everything we talk about on the show when it comes to education and achievement.
Yeah.
And that is parental expectations.
Yeah.
How much do those expectations actually end up mattering for how kids do in school?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
I mean, we've all heard the anecdotes,
Yeah.
right? But what does the research say? And that's what we're diving into today.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, for this one, we're not looking at just one or two studies. We went deep. We found this really comprehensive meta-analysis,
Oh, wow.
which means it's a study of studies, right? It combined data from a huge 169 individual studies. So it's like we get to see the big picture.
That's a lot of data. 169, that's impressive. So you're telling me we're looking at the combined wisdom of almost 170 studies on this single topic?
Yeah, pretty much. So listener, if you've ever wondered just how much weight those parental hopes and dreams for their kids' futures really carry, if you've ever questioned whether pushing your kids towards those A's or setting the bar high for college really makes a difference, well, stick with us. We've distilled all that research into the key takeaways. And we're going to uncover some surprising insights along the way. So let's get into it. First things first, the big question. Is there really a solid connection between what parents expect for their kids' education and how well those kids actually perform in school?
Okay, so jumping right into it, I'm on the edge of my seat here. What's the verdict?
Drum roll. The answer is a resounding yes. There is definitely a link. And the research shows that it's a positive one, meaning higher expectations tend to be associated with better academic performance. But here's the thing. It's not like a one-to-one perfect correlation. It's not like if you expect your kid to be a straight A student, they automatically will be. The connection is more in that small to moderate range.
Okay, so it's not a magic bullet. That makes
Right.
sense.
Exactly. The meta-analysis found that the correlation, which is how we measure the strength of a relationship between two things,
Right.
was around 0.30 when they looked at both expectations and achievement happening around the same time. So just a reminder, a perfect correlation would be 1.0.
Okay, yeah.
So 0.30 suggests there's a noticeable trend, but it's not like this overwhelming force.
So there's a definite link, but it's not a guarantee. Gotcha. But what about over time? Did they look at how these expectations might impact a kid's success years down the line?
Yeah, they did. And the cool thing is the connection still held up even when they tracked things longitudinally, which means over longer periods. The correlation there was a bit lower, about 0.28, but still significant.
So even if a parent has high hopes for their child's future, say, for them to go to college one day, that belief might actually influence their academic journey years later.
Exactly. And this is where it gets even more interesting because you might be thinking, well, isn't this all just about socioeconomic status? Kids from wealthier families with highly educated parents probably just have more advantages anyway, so of course they do better in school. And that's a valid point. But here's the key. This connection between expectations and achievement, it doesn't disappear even when you take SES out of the equation.
Okay, so are you saying they controlled for socioeconomic status in their analysis?
Yeah, exactly. They basically statistically accounted for those differences in family income, parents, education levels, things like that.
Wow.
And even after all that, the correlations only dipped slightly. They went down to 0.28 for that concurrent link and 0.26 for the longitudinal one.
So that's saying even if you have two families from totally different socioeconomic backgrounds, the power of a parent's belief in their child's academic potential might still have a real impact beyond any financial or social advantages.
Exactly. And I think that's such a crucial point. It's like this added layer of influence that goes beyond just the resources or opportunities a family might have.
I'm starting to see why this is such a fascinating topic.
Right. But, it's not just a one-way street either. It's not just parents imposing these expectations on their kids and the kids passively accepting them.
Oh, so are you saying the kid's own performance might actually influence what their parents come to expect?
Yes, precisely. It's a two-way street. It's like this dynamic feedback loop. Think about it. If a child starts exceeding expectations, parents might naturally raise the bar. Or if a child is consistently struggling, parents might adjust their expectations accordingly.
That's such a good point. It's not a static thing. It's constantly evolving.
Right. And the researchers in this meta-analysis actually dug into this by looking at what are called cross-lagged effects. Basically, they wanted to see how expectations at one point in time might predict achievement later on.
Got it. So kind of like a domino effect. They're trying to see if those expectations can set things in motion. And what did they find?
Well, they found that parents having higher expectations early on did actually predict that their children would show more improvement academically down the line, like they would make bigger gains. The correlation for that was around 0.15.
So the parent's belief might actually have a ripple effect on the child's future success. What about the other way around? Did they find that a child's earlier performance had any impact on how their parents' expectations shifted over time?
Yeah, they did. And what they found was that a child's prior academic achievements actually predicted changes in their parents' expectations later on. But this effect was a bit smaller, about 0.09.
Okay, so it seems like both things are happening, but it sounds like the initial push from the parents' expectations might be a bit stronger in shaping a child's future achievements than vice versa.
That's exactly right. And the statistical analyses actually back that up. They showed that the impact of those initial parental expectations on how a child's achievement changes over time was significantly stronger than the other way around. So yeah, it seems like that early belief from the parent really can set things in motion.
Wow, it's pretty powerful stuff. It makes you wonder why those initial expectations might have a bigger impact. Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, well, one possibility is that when parents have this specific vision for their child's academic success
Yeah.
and the child isn't quite there yet, they might be more motivated to really step in and help their child improve.
Yeah.
Maybe they provide more support at home, or they encourage the child to study harder, or they just emphasize the importance of education more often.
Right, like they have this goal in mind and they're actively trying to guide their child towards it. But what if the child is exceeding those expectations? What happens then?
Well, that's interesting too, because you would think in those cases, parents might automatically adjust their expectations upwards, right?
Yeah.
But it seems that they might not always do that right away.
Hmm.
Maybe there's a bit of a tendency to want to see that success sustained for a while before they really shift their expectations. So there's a bit of a lag there, which could explain why the impact of those initial expectations is a bit more powerful. It's almost like parents are a little hesitant to get ahead of themselves.
It makes sense. You don't want to set the bar too high too quickly. But, all this talk about expectations makes me wonder, how realistic are these parental expectations in the first place? Are parents generally spot on, or do they tend to overestimate or even underestimate what their kids are capable of?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and thankfully the meta-analysis actually looked at this too.
Okay, I'm curious to hear what they found.
Well, they basically compared the average levels of parental expectations with the average levels of the children's actual achievement.
Okay, so like how well did the parents' predictions line up with reality? What was the verdict?
Well, it turns out that parents, on average, tended to be a bit more optimistic than what the kids' later achievements actually showed. The effect size for this difference was a G of 0.35, which is considered a small to moderate difference. And when they compared parental expectations to the kids' previous achievements, so like how they had been doing before, that difference was even bigger. The G there was 0.78.
So a
So-
pretty sizable gap between what parents hope for and what actually pans out. It's interesting because it suggests that maybe some of that optimism from parents is actually beneficial. Like maybe a little bit of that extra belief can actually push kids to do better.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's like having a slightly higher target
Hmm.
to aim for. But of course, there's always a balance, right? You don't want to set unrealistic expectations that ultimately just lead to disappointment for both the parents and the child.
Exactly. You got to find that sweet spot.
Right. Now, another thing the researchers looked at was whether parental expectations themselves changed over time.
Oh, interesting. So like, did those initial expectations tend to stay stable or did they go up or down as the kids progressed through school? What did they find?
Well, they found a very, very slight tendency for parental expectations to increase over time.
Okay.
But we're talking about a really small effect here, something like a G of 0.06. And even after accounting for potential publication bias, which we can talk about another time, it only went up to 0.09.
Right.
So basically, the takeaway is that parental expectations, at least on average, tend to be fairly stable over time.
That's good to know. It means they're not just constantly fluctuating with every little up and down in a kid's performance. Okay, so we've established that these expectations matter, and they often tend to be a bit optimistic. But how do we actually get from point A to point B? What are the mechanisms that bridge the gap between a parent's belief and their child's actual academic achievements?
Right. It's not like parents just wave a magic wand and good grades appear. There are real processes at play here.
Exactly, and the researchers were curious about that too, so they dug deep into the data to figure out what factors might be mediating this relationship.
So essentially, they wanted to uncover the missing links in the chain, right? Like, How do those expectations actually translate into real-world outcomes?
Precisely. And they identified several key factors. Want me to walk you through them?
Please do. This is the really juicy stuff.
Okay, so buckle up. First up, and perhaps not surprisingly, the strongest mediating factor they found was the children's own academic expectations.
Okay.
It seems like when parents hold high expectations, it tends to foster a similar sense of expectation within their children. And those self-expectations, in turn, become a major driving force behind their academic achievement.
Right. It's like that classic saying, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Exactly. So it starts with the parent's belief, but it really takes root when the child internalizes that belief and makes it their own.
It makes total sense. If a child genuinely believes they can succeed, they're far more likely to put in the effort and persevere through challenges.
Absolutely. Now, the second key mediator they found was children's academic engagement.
Okay, so this is about how involved they are in their schoolwork, right?
Exactly. It includes things like how persistent they are when things get tough, whether they complete their homework assignments consistently, how actively they participate in class, all those things that signal a genuine investment in learning.
Right. Makes sense. So it's not just about believing you can do it, it's about actually putting in the work.
Exactly. And it seems like those higher parental expectations can actually fuel that greater involvement in schoolwork, which then naturally leads to better results.
So the parent's belief essentially translates into action on the part of the child. That's a really powerful connection.
It really is. And then the third important mediator they found was the child's academic self-concept.
Okay, so their self-concept, this is about how they see themselves as learners, right? Like whether they believe they're good at school or not.
Exactly. It's about their confidence in their own abilities, their sense of self-efficacy when it comes to academics. And it appears that when parents communicate those positive expectations, it can have a real impact on boosting a child's belief in themselves.
Right, like if your parents believe in you, you're more likely to believe in yourself. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Exactly. And that increased confidence then spills over into their actual performance. So again, we see how those initial expectations can set off a chain reaction, leading to real, tangible results.
So these first three mediators, the child's own expectations, their engagement, and their self-concept, they're all internal to the child, right?
Yes.
What about the things that parents actually do? Did those have a direct impact on bridging the gap between expectations and achievement?
Yeah, they looked into that too. And they found that parental achievement supportive behaviors did play a mediating role.
Okay, so what kind of behaviors are we talking about here?
Things like actively motivating their child, providing encouragement and support, helping them with their schoolwork, creating a positive learning environment at home, those kinds of hands-on things that parents can do to foster academic success.
Right, that makes sense. But you're saying the impact of these behaviors wasn't as strong as those internal factors we talked about earlier.
Yeah, that's right. Statistically speaking, the impact of these parental behaviors was a bit weaker compared to the child's own expectations, engagement, and self-concept.
That's really interesting. So it seems like those internal factors, that internal drive and belief system, might actually be more influential than the direct actions of the parent.
That seems to be the case. It highlights the power of the child's own motivation. Of course, this doesn't mean that what parents do is unimportant.
Right.
It just suggests that those external actions might be most effective when they work in tandem with fostering a child's own intrinsic desire to learn and succeed.
It's about empowering the child from within, rather than just trying to control things from the outside.
Exactly. Now, it's also important to remember that we're talking about partial mediations here. This means that parental expectations still had a direct influence on achievement even after considering all these other factors. It's not like the parent's belief becomes irrelevant once those internal factors kick in.
Right. It's more like a complex interplay of influences, with both the parent's belief and the child's internal state contributing to the final outcome. So we've talked about the mediators, those crucial links in the chain. But you mentioned earlier that the strength of this whole relationship between expectations and achievement can actually vary depending on different circumstances.
Yeah, that's right. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. There are certain factors that can either amplify or diminish the strength of this connection.
Okay, so let's break those down. What are some of the things that might make this relationship stronger or weaker?
Let's start with the obvious one, child age.
Right. So does the age of the child play a role in how much parental expectations matter?
It seems so. The meta-analysis found that those concurrent associations, so again, looking at expectations and achievement measured around the same time, were actually stronger for younger children, particularly elementary school students.
So the link might be more apparent in those early years. Why do you think that is?
Well, one possibility is that younger children are generally more impressionable and more reliant on their parents for guidance and support. So maybe the expectations that parents communicate during those formative years have a greater impact on shaping the child's developing beliefs about themselves and their academic abilities.
Yeah, that makes sense. Younger kids are still figuring out who they are and what they're good at, so the messages they receive from their parents can really carry a lot of weight. But what about older kids? As kids get older, they become more independent, more autonomous. Did the research suggest that the influence of parental expectations might wane as children mature?
Well, the research on this is actually a bit mixed. Some studies have suggested that the effect of parental expectations on changes in a child's achievement might decrease as they get older. But the meta-analysis didn't find a strong effect of age on the longitudinal association between expectations and later achievement. It's a subtle point, but what this tells us is that age might not play as big a role in the long-term link between expectations and ultimate academic success as we might initially think. It's just that the immediate connection might be more pronounced in younger children.
Interesting. So it seems like those expectations set early on might have lasting power, even if they become less obvious as kids grow up.
Exactly. Now, another factor they looked at was socioeconomic status. We already talked about how it doesn't completely erase the connection,
Right.
but it does seem to influence how strong it is. They found stronger concurrent associations in families with higher socioeconomic status.
Okay, so those advantages might actually amplify the effect of expectations. Why do you think that is?
Well, there are a few possibilities. One is that parents from higher SES backgrounds might simply have more realistic expectations in the first place.
Right. Maybe they have a better understanding of the educational system, or they've seen firsthand what it takes to achieve certain academic goals.
Exactly. They're drawing on their own experiences and knowledge. Plus, they might have more resources available to actually support those expectations. Things like tutors, extracurricular activities, educational materials, even just more time and energy to devote to their children's education.
Right. Access to those resources can make a huge difference. It's like having more tools in your toolbox to help your child succeed. What about ethnicity and cultural background? That's often a factor in educational research.
Yeah, and this was one of the more complex findings. They found stronger concurrent associations in studies with a lower percentage of ethnic minorities. A lot of those studies were conducted in predominantly Western countries.
Okay.
However, they didn't find a stronger association in more collectivistic non-Western countries.
Hmm. So it's not as simple as just saying that individualistic cultures value parental expectations more than collectivistic cultures.
Right. It suggests there are other factors at play here, maybe related to specific cultural norms, values, or even systemic biases within those societies.
Yeah, it's a layer of complexity that we need to acknowledge. There's a lot more research that needs to be done to fully understand those nuances. What other factors influence the strength of the relationship?
Well, they also found that the type of expectation being measured made a difference.
Okay, like whether the expectation was about something specific, like grades, or something more long-term, like getting into college.
Exactly. They found stronger associations when expectations were focused on future grades rather than the ultimate educational degree the child was expected to achieve.
Okay, so aiming for those A's might have a more immediate impact than just having a vague goal of college graduation years down the line. Why do you think that is?
It could be that grades are just more concrete, more predictable in the short term. Parents can see those report cards coming in every few months and adjust their support accordingly.
Right, it's easier to track progress and make adjustments when you have those regular benchmarks. And building on that, they found that the strongest longitudinal associations were when the type of expectation and the type of achievement being measured actually aligned. So, for example, if a parent's expectation was specifically about their child's future grades, the connection with the child's achieved grades later on was stronger than if the expectation was about something broader, like their eventual career path.
It makes sense that you're comparing apples to apples, so to speak. If you're measuring a specific expectation, you're more likely to see a clear connection with a specific achievement.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of being specific and intentional with those expectations. Now, I know we're almost out of time, but there's one more factor I wanted to touch on, that monoinformant bias you mentioned earlier.
Ah, yes, that's an interesting one. They found stronger concurrent associations when both the parental expectations and the child achievement were reported by the same person, which was usually the parent.
So this is basically saying that if you're getting both pieces of information from the same source,
Hmm.
there might be a bit of a bias there.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
could be that the parents' own perceptions are coloring both how they report their expectations and how they perceive their child's performance.
Right. There might be some unconscious filtering going on there. So, as we wrap up here, what would you say are the most important takeaways for our listeners who are interested in this whole connection between what parents expect and what their kids actually achieve academically?
Well, first and foremost, I think the main message is that parental expectations really do matter. They have a measurable impact on children's academic journeys.
They're not just wishful thinking.
Exactly. This isn't just some anecdotal thing that people say. The evidence is clear across a vast body of research that what parents believe about their children's potential can actually shape their reality.
Right. But it's not a simple equation.
No, it's definitely not a simple cause and effect relationship. It's a dynamic interplay and many factors, both internal and external to the child. And one of the most crucial takeaways is that the child's own beliefs and motivations are absolutely central to this whole process.
It's not just about what the parent expects, it's about how that expectation is internalized and acted upon by the child.
Precisely. Fostering a child's own sense of expectation, their engagement with learning, their belief in their own abilities, that seems to be the most powerful pathway through which those parental expectations can actually bear fruit.
So it's about inspiring them from within.
Exactly. Now, in terms of practical advice for parents, I think the overall message from this research is that parents should absolutely communicate those positive educational expectations to their children.
Hmm.
Encourage them, support them, believe in their potential. This can help cultivate those crucial internal beliefs and motivations that we've been talking about. But it's really important to remember that this is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Supporting academic success involves a whole ecosystem of factors, including the child's own personality, their learning style, the quality of their school environment, all those things that we talk about on this show.
Right. It's about creating a supportive and nurturing environment where children can thrive. This has been such an insightful look into this complex relationship between what parents expect and what their children achieve in school. It's clear that while those parental expectations carry weight, the story is far more nuanced than just wishful thinking leading to good grades.
Absolutely. It really underscores the importance of not just what we hope for as parents, educators, and mentors, but how those hopes are communicated, and even more importantly, how they contribute to shaping a child's own sense of what's possible for them.
And on that note, listener, we'll leave you with this. Think about the expectations that were held for you, both by yourself and by others, throughout your own educational and professional journey. What factors really empowered you to meet or even exceed those expectations? And were there any potential downsides or unintended consequences of those expectations? It's a personal reflection that extends beyond the data we've explored today, but one that I think speaks to the very heart of the power of belief and aspiration. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of parental expectations and their impact on academic achievement.